Stay with me. You hear me? Don't you dare close your eyes. Man knelt in the dark, on the side of a desert highway, pressing his hands against a stranger's bleeding shoulder, talking to someone who couldn't hear him and refusing to stop. He didn't know her name. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know that one decision made at 1:15 in the morning would shake his entire world to its foundation. He only knew she was breathing, and that was enough. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Ryan Walker had a rule he lived by. Never stop what you're doing until it's done right. He applied that rule to every engine he rebuilt, every transmission he replaced, every busted alternator he stayed up past midnight to fix. Applied it to every neighbor who limped their old pickup into his lot and said they didn't have the money yet. He applied it to his life quietly, without announcement, without expectation of anything in return. It was a rule that had never once gotten him into trouble, till the night it nearly got him killed. It was a Tuesday in late October when Ryan finally locked up the shop at midnight. Stood at the door for a moment, rubbing the grease from his knuckles with a torn shop rag, listening to the silence. The garage smelled like oil and metal and old rubber, the way it always did, the way it had smelled for the 11 years he'd run the place. He left the light on, in the back corner, the way he always did. Old habit. His father had started that habit, and Ryan had never seen any reason to break it. Drive home from Walker's Auto and Repair took 40 minutes on Route 9, out past the edge of Tucson into the open desert, where the road ran long and flat, and the darkness pressed down like a physical weight. Ryan had driven that road more times than he could count. He knew every curve, every dip, every mile marker. Could have driven it half asleep. Some nights, if he was honest with himself, he practically did. That night, the sky was wrong. Storm clouds had pushed in from the west, low and heavy, swallowing the moon. The kind of clouds that made the desert feel like it was closing in from every direction. Ryan drove with both windows cracked, letting the cold air keep him alert, listening to a country station out of Tucson that faded in and out with the terrain. He was thinking about the transmission job he had waiting for him tomorrow morning. He was thinking about whether he had enough coffee grounds left at home. He was thinking about nothing in particular. And everything at once, the small, private noise of a man driving alone through the desert at 1 in the morning, the way men do when the world has narrowed down to the glow of headlights and the hum of the engine. Then he saw the tire marks. They crossed the road at an angle, sharp and sudden, cutting through the gravel on the shoulder like something had gone wrong very fast. Deep marks, the kind that spoke of panic braking, of a vehicle fighting for control and losing. Ryan's foot came off the accelerator before his brain had fully caught up with what his eyes were seeing. He slowed, he looked. The guardrail on the right side of the road had a fresh gap in it, the metal bent outward and back, the broken edges catching the light from his headlights in a way that made his stomach drop. Pulled onto the shoulder and put the truck in park. For a moment, just a moment, he sat there. He was tired. He was alone. It was past midnight in the desert, and there were no other cars in sight, no lights in either direction, no sound except the wind moving through the scrub brush outside his window. Every reasonable part of his brain ran through the math quickly and quietly, the way brains do in the dark. You didn't see anything. You're tired. There's nothing you can do out here alone. Keep driving. But Ryan Walker had another rule, one he'd never spoken out loud and never needed to. Didn't leave things undone. He cut the engine. He grabbed his flashlight from the center console. He got out of the truck. The embankment below the guardrail dropped sharply, loose gravel and scrub brush and hard desert ground. Ryan went down it carefully, one hand on the bent guardrail to keep his balance, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of something metallic, something sharp. He found the motorcycle 20 feet below the road. It was a big machine, a cruiser, heavy and powerful, lying on its side in the dirt, the front wheel still slowly spinning. The headlight was still on, pointing sideways at a cactus, throwing strange shadows across the ground. There was oil on the rocks. There was something else, too, something dark and wet that Ryan didn't let himself look at for more than a second. There, 3 feet beyond the bike, was a woman. She was face down in the dirt, one arm bent underneath her, her helmet cracked clean across the back. She wasn't moving. Ryan crossed the distance between them in 4 seconds, dropped to his knees beside her, and put two fingers to the side of her neck. Pulse. Faint, unsteady, but there. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady, the way he'd been trained to keep it 17 years ago when he'd done his first ride-along with Tucson Fire Station 8. "Hey, can you hear me?" "Nothing. I'm going to help you. You're going to be okay. Just stay right here with me." He reached for his phone. No signal. He stared at the screen for 2 full seconds, then put the phone back in his pocket. Okay, he thought. Okay. Ryan had been a volunteer firefighter for 6 years, back when he was younger, back when he still thought he might do something like that full-time, before life had steered him into his father's garage instead. He hadn't worn the gear in almost a decade. But you don't forget what they teach you. The muscle memory doesn't go away. The protocols don't vanish just because you stopped using them. He ran his hands carefully over her neck, her spine, her skull, checking, feeling, assessing. Possible spinal injury. Don't move her unnecessarily. Airway clear, breathing but shallow, pulse thready. Wound, possibly serious. Right arm looked wrong at the shoulder. She'd been down for a while. The blood on the rocks had already begun to dry at the edges. How long had she been here? Ryan looked back up at the road. Not long since the crash, judging by the bike. But how long before someone had come along? How long would she have lasted out here alone? He felt something cold move through him, not fear exactly, but the particular chill of understanding how close a margin can be. How thin the line is between a person surviving and a person not. Pulled off his jacket and laid it over her carefully, tucking it around her without moving her arms. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "You hear me? I'm not going anywhere." He spent the next 8 minutes working through every option. He could try to drive for a signal, but that meant leaving her alone in the desert. He could flag someone down on the road, but there was no one on the road. He could stay and wait, but for what? For how long? Flashlights swept the area. The motorcycle had a saddlebag on the left side, still latched. He went to it, opened it, found a toolkit, rain tarp, water bottle, a phone, locked. He tried the emergency call function. It connected for half a second, cut out, connected again. 911, what is your emergency? "I have an injured woman on Route 9, approximately 14 miles east of the kilometer 22 marker. She's been in a motorcycle accident. She's unconscious. Possible spinal, definite head trauma. I need an ambulance." "Sir, can you give me your exact location?" The call dropped. Ryan tried again, nothing. He moved up the embankment 10 feet, tried again. Burst of static, a voice gone. He went back to her, crouched beside her, and he talked about his shop, about the truck he'd been fixing all day, a 1987 Ford that belonged to an 80-year-old man named Harold who'd driven it since it was new. About the weather, about the road, about nothing. He talked because he knew that sometimes when someone is on the edge of consciousness, the sound of another person's voice is the only thing that keeps them on the right side of it. Talked because it was the only thing he could give her right then. He didn't know her name. He didn't know that she could hear him. He found out much later, much later, that she had heard every word. 20 minutes after he found her, Ryan made the hardest decision of the night. The bleeding at the back of her head had slowed but hadn't stopped. Breathing was still shallow. Her pulse hadn't strengthened. Help was coming. It wasn't coming fast enough. Not out here. Not in these conditions. Not on this road. He had to move her. He knew the risk. He knew exactly what the risk was. Moving a patient with a possible spinal injury without immobilization equipment was the kind of thing that could cause permanent damage, could take a bad situation and make it catastrophic. Every instinct from his firefighting training screamed at him to wait, to stabilize, to let the professionals handle it. But the professionals weren't here, and the math was getting worse by the minute. Ryan spent 5 minutes building the best stabilization he could with what he had: the rain tarp from the saddlebag, his belt, the strap from the toolkit. He worked quickly and carefully, keeping her neck as still as he could, talking to her the entire time, keeping his voice steady even when his hands weren't. "This is going to be okay," he said. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. You just have to hold on." He didn't know if she could hear him. He couldn't afford to assume she couldn't. He lifted her. Getting back up the embankment with her was the longest 3 minutes of Ryan Walker's life. He was not a young man 51 years old, with a bad right knee from an old construction accident and a lower back that reminded him every morning that time passes. He was not small and he was not weak, but he was tired and the ground was loose and the darkness was absolute except for the flashlight he'd wedged into his belt. He fell once. He caught himself with his free hand, managed to keep her head from hitting the ground, lost a chunk of skin off his palm in the process. He got back up. He fell again on the last step, the lip of the embankment crumbling under his boot. He went down on one knee, hard, and he heard himself make a sound that wasn't a word, just a raw, involuntary sound of effort and pain. And then he was up and over and on solid ground. He laid her in the back seat of his truck. He got in and he drove. Ryan drove 11 miles before his phone found a signal strong enough to hold. Called 911 again, gave his location, his speed, the condition of the woman in his back seat. The dispatcher told him the nearest trauma center was in Tucson, 32 minutes away. She told him to pull over and wait for the ambulance. Ryan didn't pull over. "I'm not stopping," he said. "I'll meet them on the road." "Sir, protocol requires—" "I know what protocol requires. Tell them I'm coming in on Route 9 westbound. Tell them head trauma, possible spinal right shoulder injury. Tell them she's been stable for 20 minutes, but her breathing is getting shallower." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, what is your name?" "Tell them I'm coming," Ryan said, and he put the phone on the seat beside him and drove. He met the ambulance 7 miles outside the city limits, saw its lights first far ahead coming toward him, flashed his high beams. The ambulance slowed, stopped, and Ryan pulled up alongside it and had the back door of his truck open before the paramedics were fully out of the vehicle. What happened in the next 4 minutes was controlled and efficient, and the paramedics did exactly what they were trained to do, and Ryan stood 10 feet back and watched and didn't say anything. He didn't need to say anything. He'd given them what they needed on the phone. Now it was their turn. One of the paramedics, a young woman with close-cropped hair and a no-nonsense expression, glanced up at him once while she worked. "You did a good job with the stabilization," she said. Not praise exactly, just an acknowledgement of fact. The kind of thing one professional says to another. Ryan nodded once. They loaded her into the ambulance, and the lights went back on and they were gone, moving fast down Route 9 toward Tucson. Ryan stood on the side of the road and listened to the sound of the siren fade. Then he got back in his truck. At the hospital, they tried to get his name. The triage nurse at the emergency entrance looked up from her clipboard when Ryan came in behind the gurney and asked him if he was family. "No," Ryan said, "I'm nobody. I found her." "Sir, we're going to need some information for the report. Her motorcycle is on Route 9, about 14 miles east of the kilometer 22 marker, off the right shoulder down the embankment. You'll want to send someone to recover it." Ryan paused. "She had a phone in the saddlebag. It's locked. Someone's going to be looking for her." The nurse stared at him for a moment. "Sir, can I get your name?" Ryan looked down the hallway where they'd taken the woman. "She's going to need blood work," he said. "She was unconscious a long time before I found her. Sure, they check her temperature. Desert cold will do a number on you." "Sir, she's going to be okay," Ryan said, and then he walked out. Drove home through the dark. He didn't think about what he'd done. He didn't replay it. He didn't feel like a hero, feel like much of anything, really, except tired in the deep down way that goes past bones and settles somewhere older. He'd done what needed doing. That was all. There was no version of tonight where he drove past those tire marks and went to sleep and felt okay about it in the morning. So he hadn't. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He looked at the scraped skin on his palm, decided it would be fine, drank a glass of water, standing at the counter in the dark, looking out the window at his empty driveway. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. He went to bed at 3:47 a.m. and was asleep in under 4 minutes. He set his alarm for 6:30. He had a transmission job waiting. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not the next morning, when Dale from the parts store stopped in for coffee, and they talked for 20 minutes about the weather. Not when his neighbor Linda waved at him over the fence. Not when he called his sister on Sunday the way he did every week, and she asked him how his week had been. "Quiet," he said, and he believed it. He had no idea that on the other side of the city, in a hospital room with a window that looked out over the parking lot, a woman named Emily Whitmore was waking up, starting to ask questions. He had no idea that the man she was asking about, the man she was describing to the nurse, to the doctor, to the police officer who came to take her statement, was being searched for. He had no idea that the description she gave was being passed from person to person, city to city, through a network of people who were very good at finding things. He had no idea that the woman he had pulled from the dirt in the dark desert night was anyone other than a rider who'd gone down on a wet road. He had no idea what name she carried. He had no idea what name her husband carried. He had no idea that the world he'd spent, 11 quiet years building the shop, the garage, the small house at the end of a long driveway, was about to be found. Ryan Walker went to work on Monday morning. He opened the shop at 7. He made coffee. He got under the hood of Harold's 1987 Ford. He had absolutely no idea that a storm was already coming, and that it would arrive not with lightning, but with the sound of 100 motorcycle engines. Ryan had been under the hood of Harold's Ford for 40 minutes when he heard gravel crunching in the lot outside. He didn't look up right away. Customers came and went all morning without announcement. That was just the nature of the shop. He kept his hands where they were, feeling along the valve cover for the leak he'd been chasing since the day before, and he called out without turning around, "Be with you in a minute." Nobody answered. Ryan straightened up and turned around. There were 2 of them, big men, both wearing leather, cuts the kind with patches on the back, the kind that meant something to people who understood what the patches meant. They were standing just inside the entrance of the garage, not moving, not speaking, just standing there with their arms at their sides, looking at him with the particular kind of stillness that very large men use when they want to make a point without saying a word. Ryan looked at them for a moment. Then he picked up his shop rag and started wiping his hands. "You boys need something fixed?" he said. The taller one, a man with a gray beard that came down to his collarbone and eyes the color of old slate, tilted his head slightly. "You Ryan Walker?" "Depends on who's asking." The 2 men exchanged a look. Something passed between them, quick and unreadable. "We're asking," the gray-bearded one said. Ryan finished wiping his hands. He folded the rag and set it on the workbench beside him, taking his time, not hurrying. He had learned a long time ago that how you move in a tense moment matters more than what you say. Move slow, move deliberate. Don't give the room anything to feed on. "Yeah," he said. "I'm Ryan Walker." The gray-bearded man nodded once, like he'd expected that answer, and it confirmed something he already knew. "We need to talk to you," he said. "About what?" Another look between them. Then the gray-bearded man said, "About Tuesday night." Ryan kept his expression exactly where it was. He didn't let anything move on his face, not surprise, not recognition, not the small spike of unease that went through him at those words. "Think you've got the wrong guy," he said. "We don't," the man said simply. Somehow, the way he said it, quiet, flat, absolutely certain, made it clear that arguing was not going to be useful here. Ryan looked at both of them for a long moment. Then he said, "You want coffee?" The gray-bearded man blinked. It was the first time anything had surprised him since they walked in. "What?" "Coffee," Ryan said. "I've got a pot in the back. It's not great, but it's hot." Another pause. The 2 men looked at each other again. "Sure," the gray-bearded man said finally, like he wasn't quite sure what else to say. Ryan led them to the back of the shop. He poured 3 mugs and he sat down on a stool and he waited. The gray-bearded man's name was Cody. He did most of the talking. The other one, younger, darker, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, didn't say a word the entire time. He just stood near the door with his arms crossed and watched Ryan the way you watch something you haven't decided about yet. Cody told Ryan that they knew what had happened Tuesday night. They knew he'd found her. They knew he'd carried her up the embankment. They knew he'd driven her 11 miles through the desert to meet the ambulance. They knew he'd walked into the hospital, the triage nurse information about the motorcycle, and then turned around and walked out without giving his name. They knew, Cody said, because Emily had told them, because Emily was awake, because Emily remembered. Ryan listened to all of this without interrupting. When Cody finished, Ryan wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at it for a moment. "How is she?" he said. Cody seemed to register something at that. Like the question itself told him something. She's going to make it, he said. Surgeon said another half hour, and it would have been a different story. Ryan nodded slowly. He didn't say anything. She remembers your voice, Cody said. She says you talked to her the whole time. She says she could hear you even when she couldn't respond. Ryan looked up then. She could hear me, he said quietly. Every word. Something moved across Ryan's face just for a second, just a flicker, and then it was gone. He looked back down at his coffee. Good, he said very quietly. That's good. Cody set his own mug down on the workbench beside him. Mr. Walker, he said, his voice had shifted slightly, dropped into something more serious, more careful. Jackson Whitmore wants to meet you. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Even Ryan, who had spent the better part of 3 days telling himself he had no interest in knowing who the woman was, felt the ripple of it. He didn't say anything for a moment. I know that name, he said finally. Most people do. And he wants to meet me, yes. Ryan turned the mug slowly in his hands. Why? Cody looked at him steadily. Because you saved his wife's life and then disappeared without asking for a single thing. That's not something Jackson Whitmore has encountered very often. Didn't do it for him, Ryan said. I know. I did it because she needed help. I know that too, Cody said. That's the point. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Tell him I appreciate the visit, he said finally. Tell him I'm glad she's going to be okay. But I'm not looking for anything out of this. Not a meeting, not a thank you. Nothing. He paused. Tell him I hope she has a full recovery. Cody studied him for a long moment. The younger man near the door shifted his weight slightly, but still said nothing. I'll pass that along, Cody said. He stood up, straightened his cut, picked up his helmet from the floor where he'd rested it. But Mr. Walker, I'll tell you something for free. Jackson Whitmore is not a man who lets debts go unpaid. It's not a debt, Ryan said. Cody almost smiled. To him it is, he said. They left without finishing their coffee. Ryan sat alone in the back of his shop for a while after that. He listened to the sound of their motorcycle start up in the lot and pull out onto the road, the engine noise fading until he couldn't hear it anymore. Then it was quiet again, just the wind, the ticking of the old clock on the wall above the parts shelf. He went back to Harold's Ford. He didn't let himself think about it. That lasted about 36 hours. The call came Thursday morning, just before 8. Unknown number. Ryan almost didn't answer it, but something made him pick up some instinct he couldn't have named. Mr. Walker. The voice on the other end was a man's voice, low and measured, with a quality to it that Ryan noticed immediately. Not loud, not aggressive, but with a weight behind it, a density, the kind of voice that was accustomed to being listened to. My name is Jackson Whitmore. Ryan stopped what he was doing. Mr. Whitmore, he said, I want to apologize for sending men to your shop without warning. Jackson said, that wasn't my intention. I only wanted to find you. Didn't want to alarm you. I wasn't alarmed, Ryan said. Beat of silence. Then something that might have been the beginning of a dry, surprised laugh quickly controlled. No, Jackson said. Cody told me you offered them coffee. Seemed like the right thing to do. Another pause. Longer this time, Mr. Walker. Jackson said. I want to meet with you. In person. I want to thank you face to face for what you did for my wife. You don't need to do that, Ryan said. I know I don't need to, Jackson said. The patience in his voice was immense. A man used to navigating conversations that pushed back at him. I want to. There's a difference. Ryan leaned against the truck he was working on. Mr. Whitmore, he said, I'm going to say this as plainly as I can because I think you're a man who appreciates plain speech. Stopped on that road because there was a person who needed help. That's the beginning and the end of it. I don't want a meeting. Don't want a reward. I don't want anything at all. I hope your wife recovers completely, and I hope you both have a good life. That's genuinely all I've got to say on the matter. The silence on the other end, this time, was different. It wasn't the silence of a man thinking of what to say next. It was the silence of a man recalibrating. You mean that, Jackson said finally. It wasn't a question, I do. You're not angling for something. No, another long pause. Most people, Jackson started, and then he stopped. He seemed to be choosing his next words with unusual care, more care than he was accustomed to using. Most people who find themselves in a position to do something for me expect something in return. It's human nature. I've been dealing with that my entire life. I understand it. That's not me, Ryan said. I'm beginning to understand that, Jackson said. Paused again. Tell me something. When you found her, when you saw her down there, what was the first thing you thought? Ryan didn't have to think about that. I thought about getting down to her, he said. That's all. That was the only thought. Jackson was quiet for a moment. She told me you talked to her, he said. And for the first time, his voice shifted, something beneath the controlled surface moving, just slightly. She said you told her about your shop, about a truck you were fixing, about a customer. Harold, Ryan said. Harold, Jackson repeated. She said that when she felt herself starting to drift, when she felt herself going somewhere she didn't want to go, she held on to the sound of your voice. She said it was the most ordinary thing she'd ever heard. It was the most important. Ryan didn't say anything. She held on because of you, Jackson said. She's alive because you stopped and you didn't leave her. Ryan's grip on the phone was a little tighter than it needed to be. Glad she made it, he said. So am I, Jackson said. In those 3 words was something so enormous and so private that Ryan almost looked away, as if he'd seen something not meant to be seen. Then Jackson said quietly, let me thank you. That's all I'm asking. Just let me look you in the eye and say what needs to be said. Ryan stood in his garage for a long moment. He thought about saying no again. Thought about how easy no was, how clean, how it let him go back to being exactly the person he'd been before Tuesday night, the man in the garage, the man on the quiet road, the man who helped people and went home alone and didn't need anything from anyone. Thought about how that life had felt for 11 years and whether it had always felt the way it had felt lately and what the word for that feeling was. Finally, one meeting. Somewhere public. Jackson actually paused at that. Then he said, you want a public location. Don't know you, Ryan said simply. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I don't know you. There was a silence. And then Jackson Whitmore laughed a real laugh, quiet and unexpected, with something almost like relief in it. Fair enough, he said. Fair enough, Mr. Walker. They agreed on a diner on the east side of Tucson. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Ryan hung up the phone and stood very still for a moment. Then he went back to work. He told himself it would be a short meeting. He told himself he'd say what needed to be said, listen to what Jackson Whitmore wanted to say, shake the man's hand, and be back in the shop by 11. He told himself this was the end of it. Saturday morning came and Ryan drove to the diner and sat in a booth near the window and ordered black coffee and waited. Jackson Whitmore walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. Ryan had done some reading. He knew who Jackson was, had a general sense of the man's reputation, had seen a few photographs. But photographs, he was discovering immediately, were an extremely imperfect way to prepare yourself for the experience of Jackson Whitmore walking towards you across a diner. He was not what Ryan had expected. He was tall, taller than Ryan, which was saying something with iron gray hair cut close and a face that had been through decades of weather and decision and carried the evidence of both. He was wearing a plain dark shirt, no cut, no insignia. He looked like a man who had nothing to prove, which Ryan knew from experience was the most dangerous kind. Sat down across from Ryan without extending his hand first. He looked at Ryan for a long moment. Ryan looked back. You're smaller than I expected, Jackson said. You're quieter, Ryan said. Something moved in Jackson's face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. The waitress came. Jackson ordered coffee black and then waited until she was gone before he said anything else. Been trying to figure out what to say to you since Tuesday, he said. You don't have to say anything, Ryan said. I meant what I told you on the phone. I know you did, Jackson said. But I do have to. Some things need to be said out loud, even if the other person doesn't need to hear them. He paused. Maybe especially then. Ryan waited. Jackson wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at it for a moment. Emily and I have been together for 26 years, he said. Done a lot of things in my life that I'm not going to apologize for. But I've also done things I would undo in a heartbeat if I could. Things that cost me. He paused. She stayed through all of it. Every single thing. And there were moments, there were years when she had every reason not to. He looked up at Ryan. When they called me from the hospital, he said, when they told me she'd been brought in, that she'd been found on the side of the road, alone, in the middle of the desert. His voice dropped slightly. I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life, Mr. Walker, but I have never felt what I felt in that moment. Ryan held his gaze and didn't look away. She is everything, Jackson said. Not dramatically, just as a statement of fact, the way you'd state the temperature or the time. She is the only thing I have in this world that I know for certain is good. She almost died on the side of a road because I let her ride home alone after we fought. The last sentence came out differently from the rest, quieter, with a roughness under it, like something that had been sitting in his chest for and only just now found a way out. We fought, he said again. Something stupid. The kind of thing that doesn't matter. She left on her bike because she needed air, the way she always does when we fight, and the road was wet from the storm, and she went down. Stopped. Ryan didn't say anything. He understood that some things needed space around them. She almost died, Jackson said, over a fight about something I can't even remember the details of now. She was out there. For he paused, and it was the pause of a man doing the math and hating every number 40 minutes before you stopped. 40 minutes in the dark and the cold. He looked at Ryan directly. You stopped, he said. Yes, Ryan said. You didn't know who she was. No, you didn't stop because of who she was. I stopped because she was a person, Ryan said. That's the only reason there is. Jackson studied him for a long moment. Cody told me what you said, he said. When he asked you to meet me and you said no. Told me what you said. I didn't do it for him. Did it because she needed help. That's true, Ryan said. I know it is, Jackson said. That's why I needed to be here. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know how rarely I encounter someone who does something purely, no angle, no agenda, no calculation, just because it was the right thing? Ryan shifted slightly in his seat. Compliments made him uncomfortable in the specific way that true things said to your face by a stranger can make you uncomfortable. Not special, he said. I just didn't drive past. Don't do that, Jackson said. His voice was quiet but pointed. Don't diminish it. You carried her up an embankment in the dark with a bad knee. Drove through the desert at 2 a.m. to meet an ambulance halfway. You stayed with her and you talked to her, and because of that, she had something to hold on to. He paused. I know what you did. I know all of it. Don't you stand here and tell me it was nothing. Ryan looked at him for a moment. I'm not saying it was nothing, he said carefully. Saying it's just what you do. When there's a person who needs help, you help them. That's not special. That's just what's required. Jackson sat back in his seat. He looked at Ryan for a long time, his expression unreadable, and Ryan had the sense of being seen in a very particular way, the way a man looks at something he didn't expect to find. My father used to say something like that, Jackson said, finally. And his voice was different, now quieter, more private. A long time ago, before everything. He paused. I forgot what that sounded like. The diner hummed around them. Silverware voices the bell over the door. Ordinary Saturday morning sounds, the sounds of people going about their lives. Ryan looked at the man across the table and thought about Cody had said Jackson Whitmore is not a man who lets debts go unpaid, and he thought about what Jackson had just said about his father, about the particular tone of it, about the word forgot. Thought about how people move through the world carrying things that nobody sees. She's really going to be okay, Ryan said. Jackson's jaw tightened for just a second, not with anger, with the effort of containing something. She's going to be okay, he said. She's asking about you. She's been asking about you since she woke up. She wants to thank you herself. Ryan nodded slowly. When she's ready, he said. Jackson put both hands flat on the table. He looked at Ryan with an expression that was difficult to name, not gratitude exactly, though that was part of it. Something older than gratitude, something closer to recognition. I want to do something for you, he said. I need to do something. You understand that. You don't, Ryan started. I know I don't, Jackson said, but I'm asking you to let me. He paused. Whatever you need. Whatever it is, name it. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Thought about the shop. The roof that had been leaking for 2 years. The fence along the back of the property that was barely standing. A hydraulic lift that needed a new pump. The things he'd been telling himself he'd get to that he never got to because there was always someone else's problem that needed fixing first, and his own could wait. Thought about all of that. And then he thought about something else. Thought about Saturday mornings in that shop, alone. Thought about Sunday evenings in that house, alone. Thought about how the word quiet had meant something different to him once, a long time ago, not peaceful, not comfortable, but simply what was left. Thought about how long it had been since anyone had sat across from him at a table and spoken to him like this. He mattered. Like the thing he carried, not his skills, not his utility, not what he could fix or what he could lift or what he could do for someone, but him, the actual Ryan Walker, was worth something. Sat with all of that for a moment. Then he said, "The roof on my shop has been leaking for 2 years. I haven't had time to deal with it." Jackson looked at him, a long look, like he was taking the measure of something. "That's all," he said. "That's all," Ryan said. Jackson was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said finally. "The roof." He said it like a man who understood that the small thing Ryan had asked for was not, in fact, a small thing. Like a man who had heard the whole sentence, including the parts that Ryan hadn't said. They sat in that diner for another 40 minutes, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with Tuesday night. Jackson asked about the shop, about how long Ryan had been running it, about his father. Ryan asked about Emily, about how she was recovering, about whether she'd been riding long. Talked the way two men talk when they have discovered, unexpectedly, that they are not as different from each other as either of them had assumed. Jackson stood up to leave. He extended his hand. Ryan stood and took it. Jackson held the handshake for a moment, longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you," he said, just that. No flourish, no rhetoric. Ryan nodded. "Tell her I'm glad she made it." "She'll want to tell you herself," Jackson said. He walked out of the diner, and Ryan sat back down and finished his coffee and looked out the window at the parking lot. He watched Jackson Whitmore cross the lot, watched him stop beside a black truck, watched him stand there for a moment with one hand on the door, not moving. Then Jackson looked up at the sky, just for a second, just briefly, the way a man looks at something when he needs a moment alone with himself, and the only privacy available is the space above his own head. Then he got in the truck and drove away. Ryan sat with his empty coffee cup and the check and the ordinary sounds of the diner around him. Something had shifted. He couldn't have said exactly what, couldn't have named it, couldn't have pointed to the specific moment it happened. But something was different in the room, or in him, or both. And as he put money on the table and pulled on his jacket and walked toward the door, he carried the difference with him. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know about the calls Jackson was making that afternoon. He didn't know what Jackson had said to Cody, what Cody had said to the others, what had been decided and planned and set into motion while Ryan drove back to his shop and changed the oil on a minivan that belonged to a woman named Patricia, who taught second grade and tipped him $20 every single time because she said he was the only honest mechanic she'd ever found. He didn't know. He went to bed that Saturday night the same man he'd always been, or so he believed. He woke up Sunday morning to a silence that was about to end. Somewhere in the city, 100 engines were already warming up. Ryan heard them before he saw them. He was in the kitchen, second cup of coffee in hand, standing at the counter the way he always stood on Sunday mornings, not because sitting felt too settled for a man who had nowhere particular to be and wasn't sure how he felt about that. He was looking at nothing. He was thinking about the diner, about Saturday morning, about the way Jackson Whitmore had stood in the parking lot and looked up at the sky. He was thinking about Emily, who had been able to hear him but not answer him, who had held on to the sound of a stranger's voice, about an old Ford truck and a man named Harold, who had used that voice like a rope in the dark. He was thinking about all of it in the loose, undirected way that Sunday mornings allow, when the first sound reached him. Low, distant, a vibration more than a sound at first, something that traveled through the floor before it reached his ears. Thought it was a truck. On the highway, he thought it was thunder, though the sky had been clear when he checked it 20 minutes ago. He set down his coffee cup. The sound grew. Not like thunder grows, not building and rolling and variable. This was steady, rhythmic, multiplying. The sound of engines, many engines, all moving together with the particular controlled thunder of motorcycles running in formation. Ryan walked to his front window. He looked out. The first riders were just cresting the hill at the end of his road. Then more came over behind them. Then more. Ryan stood at his window and watched and felt something cold and electric move through him from his feet to the top of his skull because the line of motorcycles coming over that hill was not ending. Kept coming. It kept coming. Too wide, riding steady, filling his narrow road from shoulder to shoulder, headlights cutting through the morning air, and Ryan counted 10, 20, 30, 50, and they were still coming. Phone rang. He picked it up without looking at the screen. Mr. Walker Jackson's voice. Calm, measured. Look out your front window. I'm already there, Ryan said. Good. A pause. I want you to know this is not a threat, not a demonstration of power. I need you to understand that before you see all of it. How many, Ryan said. A beat of silence. A lot, Jackson said. Ryan watched them fill his road, fill his driveway, spill into the open land around his property, motorcycles as far as he could see in either direction, engines cutting off one by one as riders reached their positions, so that the thunder slowly became a rumble, and the rumble slowly became an idling, and then gradually silence. Enormous weighted silence of men and machines settling into stillness. Why? Ryan said. Because you need to hear something, Jackson said. Some things need witnesses. Ryan heard the sound of boots on gravel outside his door. Then a knock. He opened it. Jackson Whitmore stood on his front step, not in a diner booth, not across a table, not in the neutral territory of a public space. Here, on Ryan's own ground, and behind him, stretching back as far as Ryan could see, were riders. Dozens, hundreds, standing beside their bikes, helmets in hand, watching the door with a quiet attention that felt nothing like a crowd and everything like a congregation. Ryan looked out at all of them. Then he looked at Jackson. You said somewhere public, Jackson said, and the quiet humor in his voice was real and earned. Ryan almost said something. He didn't. Can I come in? Jackson said. Ryan stepped back and held the door open. Jackson came in. He looked around Ryan's kitchen, the single coffee cup, the single chair pushed back from the table, the shop rag folded on the counter with the same unconscious precision Ryan applied to everything. He looked at all of it, and Ryan could see him reading it, understanding something from it, filing it away. You live alone, Jackson said. I do, Ryan said. Long time, Ryan looked at him. Long enough. Jackson nodded, pulled out a kitchen chair, and sat down without being invited. The way certain men sit, not rudely, but with the ease of someone who occupies whatever space he's in without thinking about it. I want to tell you what's going to happen today, he said. And I want you to hear me out before you say no. I notice you're already inside, Ryan said. I am, Jackson agreed. There are approximately 200 motorcycles on my property, give or take. So my ability to say no is somewhat theoretical at this point. Something moved in Jackson's face, not quite a smile, but the closest relative of one. You can say no, he said, and we'll leave, every one of us, right now if you want. You say the word and we go. Ryan looked at him for a long moment. He thought about it. He actually genuinely thought about it. He thought about the word quiet and what it meant, and whether it was the same as the word peaceful, and whether he had ever in his life confused the two. What's going to happen today? He said. Jackson leaned forward and put his hands on the table. My people are going to fix your roof, he said. They're going to fix your fence. They're going to pull that hydraulic lift apart and put it back together with a new pump, which Cody already sourced yesterday. They're going to do whatever else they find that needs doing. He paused. They want to do it. That's not a figure of speech. Told them what happened on that road Tuesday night, and I told them who you are, and I told them you drove her 11 miles through the desert alone and then walked out of a hospital without giving your name. Every person out there asked what they could do. Ryan was very quiet. They're not here because I told them to be, Jackson said. They're here because they wanted to come. Ryan pulled out the other kitchen chair, sat down across from Jackson. He looked at the table between them. I don't know what to do with this, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said since Tuesday night. Jackson looked at him. I know, he said. Men like you never do. That's the problem. Ryan looked up at him. Men like me, he said. Men who spend their whole lives helping other people and can't figure out what to do when someone tries to help them back, Jackson said. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being pointed. He was just being accurate in the blunt way of a man who had spent a long time learning to say true things plainly. Men who think needing something is a character flaw. Ryan opened his mouth and then closed it again. I'm not criticizing you, Jackson said. Describing you. There's a difference. He paused. My wife is the same way. She spent 26 years helping me keep myself together, and she never once asked for anything in return. And there were years when I didn't even notice she needed me to notice. His jaw tightened. I notice now. They sat in that kitchen in a silence that was oddly comfortable, oddly honest, the silence of two men who had arrived at the same truth from completely different directions. Then Ryan said, "The roof leaks worst in the northeast corner." Jackson looked at him. Over the parts shelving, Ryan added, "You'll want to start there." Jackson held his gaze for a moment. Then he stood up and went to the door and said something to Cody, who was waiting outside. Ryan heard Cody relay it down the line in a chain of voices, and then he heard the sound of men moving, organized and purposeful, the particular sound of people who know what they're doing and have come ready to do it. Ryan sat in his kitchen and listened to the sound of his property waking up around him. He heard boots on his roof within 10 minutes. He heard power tools from the direction of the garage. He heard voices, not the sharp signaling voices of men working under stress, but the ordinary voices of men working together, calling back and forth, the low background music of a group of people who were comfortable with each other and with what they were doing. Ryan sat in his kitchen for a while longer. Then he stood up, poured the rest of his coffee down the sink, put on his boots, and went outside. What he saw stopped him on his front step. He had known intellectually that there were a lot of people on his property, counted and estimated and understood it from inside his kitchen window. But standing in it was something different entirely, because it wasn't just the number of people. It wasn't just the scale of it. It was the fact that every single one of them was working, not watching, not standing around, not waiting for direction, working. The fence line had a crew of 6 on it, pulling old posts, setting new ones that they'd apparently brought with them. The garage had a team inside that had already begun on the lift. The roof, Ryan looked up and counted at least 8 men moving across it with practiced efficiency, tearing away damaged sections and beginning to lay new material that had arrived in a truck Ryan hadn't noticed pulling in. A man named Dell, who turned out to be a contractor in his other life, found Ryan standing on the step and walked over and shook his hand and told him they'd have a full assessment of the property done within the hour and that anything structural would be dealt with today. Full stop. No argument. Ryan looked at Dell for a moment. "You do this a lot?" he said. Dell shrugged. "When it needs doing," he said simply, and went back to what he was doing. That was when Ryan noticed the woman standing near the gate. She was leaning on a cane, moving slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone who had been told by a doctor to take it easy and was not finding that instruction particularly easy to take. She was wearing a leather jacket, and her dark hair was pulled back, and there was a bandage visible at the back of her head. And she was watching Ryan with an expression that he couldn't quite read from this distance, something that was part relief, part something else, something older and harder to name. Ryan walked toward her. She stopped leaning on the cane and straightened up, slowly, with effort, but she straightened. They met near the middle of the driveway. She was taller than he'd realized, standing, slender, with dark eyes that were very direct, the kind of eyes that had spent years looking at people and deciding very quickly what they were made of. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore," Ryan said. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Just looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have been trying to see clearly for a long time and are finally seeing in person. "You talked to me about a truck," she said. Ryan felt something shift in his chest. "Harold's Ford," he said. "'87, he's had it since it was new." Emily Whitmore nodded slowly. Something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, but the specific expression of someone who is matching a memory to a reality and finding they align. "I heard you," she said. "I want you to know that. I know you don't know that, but I heard every word." "So I was told," Ryan said. "No," she said. "I need you to understand it, not just know it. I heard you. When I felt myself going away, when I felt the dark coming in at the edges, I heard your voice telling me about the valve cover leak on a 1987 Ford, and I thought," she stopped. She pressed her lips together for a second. "I thought, I have to find out if he gets that leak fixed. I have to know how the story ends." Ryan looked at her. "Did," Ryan said, "get the leak fixed." 2 days later, Emily Whitmore laughed. It was a short, soft laugh, a little rough around the edges with the effort it cost her, but completely genuine. "Good," she said. "Good for Harold." They stood together for a moment in the middle of all the activity, in the midst of all those people working and moving and making noise, and somehow the two of them were in a quiet pocket in the center of it. Why did you leave, she said. At the hospital. Why didn't you stay? Ryan considered the question. Because it was done, he said. You were with the people who could take care of you. You didn't need me anymore. She studied him. Did you ever think that maybe I'd want to thank you? Didn't do it for the thanks, Ryan said. I know that, Emily said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, did you think about me at all after? Did you wonder whether I made it? Ryan was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, but you didn't try to find out, no. Why not? Ryan thought about that. He looked past her at his property, at the men on the roof, at the crew on the fence, at the sounds of things being fixed and set right. Because knowing wouldn't have changed what I did, he said finally. Not knowing kept it simple. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Simple, she repeated, yeah. Simple, she said again, and there was something in the word, not mockery, not criticism, something more complex than either of those. Like she was weighing the word and finding it both accurate and insufficient at the same time. You are the most quietly strange man I've ever met, she said. Ryan almost smiled. I get that sometimes, he said. She shifted her weight on the cane. Ryan watched her do it, and he didn't offer to help her because she hadn't asked, and he had the sense that she was not a woman who appreciated help she hadn't asked for. He respected that. He understood it. I want to tell you something, she said. Her voice changed slightly, dropped into a register that was more private, less public. About what Jackson said to me when he got to the hospital. When he got there, and I was already in surgery, and he had to wait. Ryan waited. He told me afterwards, she said. He sat in that waiting room for 4 hours. Alone, which is not something Jackson Whitmore does. He doesn't sit still. He doesn't wait. He controls things. That's who he is. That's how he's built. Everything in his world is something he can affect or direct or decide. He sat in a waiting room for 4 hours with nothing to do and nothing to control and no way to know, and it nearly destroyed him. She paused. When I came out of surgery, he was standing in the hallway, and I have been with that man for 26 years, and I have seen him in situations that would flatten most people, and I have never seen him look the way he looked in that hallway. She stopped again, steadied herself. He said, and this is a man who does not say things like this. This is not a man who uses these words, he said. I would give everything I have, every single thing, just to have another ordinary Tuesday with you. Ryan looked at her. She looked back at him. An ordinary Tuesday, she said. Tuesday wasn't the night. I almost didn't come home. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone holding something carefully with both hands. He meant it. I know when he means something, he meant every word. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be less than the moment required. You gave us that, Emily said. The ordinary Tuesdays we're going to have. Ordinary Tuesdays we almost didn't get. You gave us those. She looked at him directly. So I need you to let us do this. I need you to stand here and let these people fix your roof and your fence and whatever else he's fixing, and I need you to not make it about humility or not wanting anything, because this is not about what you want. This is about what we need. Do you understand the difference? Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what Jackson had said in the diner. Some things need to be said out loud, even if the other person doesn't need to hear them. Maybe especially then. He understood now what that meant. He said, I understand. Emily nodded once. Something in her posture changed, not relaxing exactly, but settling, the way a person settles when a thing that needed doing is done. Good, she said. She looked around at the property, at all the work being done, at the men who had come here on a Sunday morning because they wanted to. You know, she said, Jackson's been trying to figure you out since he heard about you. Who you are, what you're about, why you did what you did. She paused. I think he was trying to find the angle. Because in his world, there's always an angle. There wasn't one, Ryan said. I know, Emily said. That's what he couldn't figure out. That's what kept him up. She almost smiled. Then he met you and you offered his guys coffee and said you didn't want anything, and he came home and he sat at our kitchen table and he was quiet for a long time. And then he looked at me and he said, I think that man is just a good person. Don't know what to do with that. Ryan looked at her, thought about a man like Jackson Whitmore sitting at a kitchen table trying to decode something as simple as a person doing the right thing and finding it incomprehensible. Thought about what that said about the world Jackson had lived in, what it said about the years that had built him. He thought about how lonely that must have been. without ever knowing it was loneliness. What did you tell him? Ryan said. Emily Whitmore looked at him with those direct dark eyes. Told him to go say thank you, she said. And then I told him to pay attention. Because men like that, men who just do the right thing without needing something back, you don't find them very often. When you do, you don't let them disappear back into the quiet. Ryan looked down at the ground for a moment. When he looked back up, Cody was walking toward them from the direction of the garage, and his expression was the expression of a man who has something to say and isn't entirely sure how to say it. We found something, Cody said. He looked at Ryan. The garage, back wall. Ryan frowned. What do you mean you found something? You need to come see, Cody said. Ryan followed him into the garage. The lift had been pulled apart and the hydraulic components were laid out on a clean tarp. Back wall had been cleared of some of the shelving to get to the roof supports, and in clearing it, someone had moved a large flat piece of plywood that had been leaning against the wall for so long Ryan had stopped seeing it. Behind it was a workbench, and on the workbench were tools, old tools older than Ryan's tools, older than the garage as Ryan had run it, laid out in the specific careful arrangement of a man who had used them in a particular order and put them back the same way every time. His father's tools, Ryan hadn't moved them in 9 years. He'd covered them with the plywood when he'd reorganized the garage after his father died, and he'd told himself he'd deal with them. Later and later had turned into 9 years without him ever quite being able to bring himself to do it. He stood and looked at them. Cody stood beside him. We didn't touch them, Cody said quietly. We just uncovered them. If you want us to put the plywood back. No, Ryan said. Voice was steady. Leave them. He stood there for another moment, looking at his father's tools laid out the way his father had always laid them out. Thought about rules, about never stopping until something's done right, about where rules like that come from and who teaches them and what you carry forward when the teacher is gone. Thought about a 1987 Ford that an 80-year-old man had driven since it was new. Thought about Tuesday night on Route 9 and a choice that had seemed simple in the moment and was still simple, actually even now had always been simple, would always be simple, no matter what had come from it or what was still coming. Father had taught him that. The rule had always been his father's first. Ryan reached out and picked up a socket wrench from the bench, turned it over in his hands once, set it back down exactly where it had been. Let's get back to it, he said. Cody nodded and they went back outside. The morning went on. The sounds of the work continued. Dell found him at 11 with an update on the roof and a list of 3 other structural issues he wanted to address. And Ryan listened to all of it and said yes to all of it and didn't argue about any of it. At noon, someone produced food from somewhere. Ryan never found out exactly how it happened, but suddenly there were folding tables set up in the lot and coolers and enough food to feed everyone on the property twice over. Men came off the roof and came in from the fence line and came out of the garage, and they ate together in Ryan's driveway, and the noise was enormous. The kind of noise that a space makes when it has never had that many people in it before and is figuring out what to do with them. Ryan sat on the tailgate of his truck and ate and looked at all of it. Jackson came and sat beside him without asking. They ate in silence for a while. You doing okay? Jackson said finally. Ryan thought about the question. Don't know what this is, Ryan said. I want to be honest with you. Been alone a long time. I don't know what to do with 150 people in my driveway. 167, Jackson said. That doesn't help, Ryan said. Jackson almost smiled. You don't have to do anything, Jackson said. That's the thing you keep missing. You don't have to manage this or direct it or earn it. You just have to be here. Ryan looked at him. Just be here, he repeated. That's it, Jackson said. That's all. The way you were there for her on that road. You didn't do 167 things. You did one thing. You stayed. That's all we're asking you to do today. Ryan turned that over. It was, he realized, the simplest and also the hardest instruction he'd ever been given. Because staying, truly staying, not physically, but in the full sense of the word, being present, being open, letting people in was something he hadn't done in a long time. Maybe longer than 9 years. Maybe longer than he knew. He had been helping people for years, for as long as he could remember, and there was safety in being the one who helped. There was a known quantity to it, a shape he understood, a role that was clear. The helper, the man with the tools, The man you call when something breaks. This sitting still while people fixed his things, while people fed him, while people showed up on a Sunday morning because they wanted to duck. This was different. This required something different. And the thing it required had a name he was only just now willing to say to himself. It required trust, and he had been very, very quiet for a very long time. Jackson didn't push it. He finished his food and stood up and went back to managing the work in the way Jackson Whitmore managed everything quietly, from the edges, with the minimum of visible authority and the maximum of actual effect. Emily found Ryan again around 2 in the afternoon. She sat down beside him on the tailgate with the careful, deliberate movements of someone 3 days out of surgery who was doing more than she should and had decided not to care. "You found something in the garage," she said. Ryan looked at her. "Cody told you," he said. "Cody tells me everything," she said. It's one of his less charming qualities. She paused. "Your father's? Yeah. How long ago did you lose him?" 9 years, Ryan said. Emily nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I lost my mother 8 years ago," she said. "I still pick up the phone sometimes. Still reach for it before I remember." She paused. "Don't think that goes away. I think we just build around it." Ryan looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." "Tools," she said. "You're going to leave them out?" "Yeah," he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression had changed, had gentled into something more open. "Good," she said quietly. "Things like that shouldn't stay covered." They sat together on the tailgate in the middle of all those people and all that noise, and Ryan thought about what she'd said, things like that shouldn't stay covered, and understood that she wasn't only talking about tools. The afternoon continued. The work went on. The roof was done by 3. The fence was done by 4. The lift had a new pump and had been tested and certified, working by a man who turned out to be a licensed hydraulic technician in his professional life, which Ryan found quietly stunning. 5 o'clock, as the light was beginning to go gold, and the shadows were lengthening, the work wound down. Men began loading equipment into trucks, stowing tools, closing up the trailers they'd arrived with. The organized efficiency of arrival was mirrored by the organized efficiency of departure. Everything cleaned up, everything put right, nothing left behind. Ryan stood in the middle of his property and watched it happen. One by one, and then in groups, the riders came to him before they left. They didn't make speeches. They didn't want anything from him. They shook his hand, some of them, or clapped a hand on his shoulder, or just nodded at him with the simple nod of one person acknowledging another. Few of them said things, short things, plain things. One man, older, silver-haired, with hands that told the story of a life of physical work, shook Ryan's hand and held it for a moment and said, "My wife was in an accident 6 years ago." Nobody stopped. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Ryan held that handshake. "I'm sorry," he said. The man nodded once and walked to his bike. Ryan stood and watched him go. He stood and watched all of them go one by one, then in clusters, then the long formation they'd arrived in back up his road and over the hill. The sound of engines building and then fading, building and fading, till the last of them had gone over the rise and the sound was gone. Silence came back, but it was different silence. Not the silence of a space that has always been empty. The silence of a space that has had something in it and now holds the shape of that thing. The silence of a diner after the last customer leaves. The silence of a garage at the end of a long day when the work is done and done right. Ryan stood in his driveway in the quiet. His roof was fixed. Fence was standing. His lift worked. His father's tools were uncovered. Ryan Walker, the man who had spent 11 years helping other people with everything they needed and asking for nothing in return, the man who had driven home alone every night on Route 9 and gone to sleep in a quiet house and gotten up and done it again. Ryan Walker stood in his own driveway at 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately name, that his property was not empty, even though everyone was gone. The feeling stayed. He didn't know what to call it. He went inside. He made coffee, sat down at his kitchen table, pulled out the one he always pulled out, and he sat down. Then he reached across the table and pulled out the other chair. He left it out. He didn't know why. He just did. He sat there in his kitchen with 2 chairs pulled out from the table and a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, and he thought about a woman who had held on in the dark because of an ordinary voice talking about ordinary things and a man who had said he would give everything for one more ordinary Tuesday, and a silver-haired man who had said nobody stopped, and a workbench full of tools that had been covered for 9 years and were now uncovered. He thought about what Emily had said. Things like that shouldn't stay covered. He sat with that for a long time. Outside, the desert was going dark, the way it does fast and completely, the sky moving through colors, and then settling into the deep blue black that swallowed everything. Ryan sat in his kitchen and listened to his house. Still felt quiet, but the quiet had a different texture now, not the quiet of absence. Something else, something he was going to have to sit with for a while before he knew what to call it. He was still sitting there with the cold coffee and the two chairs when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Walker, a woman's voice. Not Emily, not anyone he recognized. Older, careful, with the particular precision of someone accustomed to choosing their words. My name is Margaret Coles. I'm a journalist with the Arizona Tribune. I've been looking into the rescue on Route 9 last Tuesday night, and a number of sources have indicated you may be the individual involved. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you're willing. Ryan was very still. How did you get this number, he said. We have our methods, she said. Not unkindly, just factually. I understand you may not want to speak publicly. But Mr. Walker, what happened on that road is exactly the kind of story people need to hear right now. The connection to Jackson Whitmore. Ryan hung up, sat there holding the phone. Then he called Jackson. Jackson picked up on the second ring. I know, Jackson said before Ryan could speak. Margaret Coles. She's been making calls all afternoon. She's good at her job. How did she find me? Ryan said. Someone at the hospital talked. Jackson said, it happens. I'm sorry. Ryan looked at the wall. What does this mean? He said. Jackson was quiet for a moment. It means, he said carefully, that the quiet is about to get a lot louder. And I need to know, do you want me to help you manage that? Or do you want to handle it yourself? Ryan thought about the silver-haired man with the working life hands. Nobody stopped. He thought about how many roads there were, how many dark stretches of highway at 1 a.m, how many people who went past. What would it mean? Ryan said. The story got out. What would it actually mean? It would mean a lot of people hear about a man who stopped, Jackson said simply. Maybe some of them remember it the next time they almost don't. Ryan sat in the quiet of his kitchen with two chairs pulled out from the table. Thought about his father. He thought about rules, about doing things right, about not leaving things undone. He sat with all of it. Okay, he said finally. Jackson waited. Tell me what I need to know, Ryan said. Jackson talked for 20 minutes. Ryan listened to all of it without interrupting, sitting at his kitchen table with the cold coffee and the two chairs. When Jackson was done, Ryan said he needed to sleep on it, and Jackson said, take all the time you need, and they hung up. And Ryan sat there for another hour, not sleeping on anything, just sitting in the particular kind of stillness that arrives when your life has just been handed a choice that can't be undecided. The journalist would run the story with or without him. Jackson had made that clear without making it a threat. It was just the reality of how these things worked. Margaret Coles had enough to write something. She had the hospital, she had the accident report, she had Route 9 and a timeline and sources who had talked. What she didn't have was Ryan himself. What she didn't have was his voice, his words, the thing that would turn a news item into something people actually felt. Ryan understood the difference. He'd never wanted to be in a newspaper in his life, had never wanted to be the kind of man people wrote about, but he understood the difference. He went to bed at 10. He stared at the ceiling until midnight, thought about the silver-haired man. Nobody stopped. Thought about those two words and what they weighed and what they would weigh differently if the man saying them had been sitting in a hospital instead of a driveway, waiting on news instead of standing in the sun shaking hands. Thought about all the roads, all the highways, all the dark stretches at 1 a.m. where someone goes down. And the question becomes simply, does the next person stop or not? What determines that? And whether anything can move that number, even slightly, even by 1. He fell asleep at 12:47 thinking about a number, woke up at 6 and called Jackson. Set up the interview, he said. Jackson didn't say, I told you so. He didn't say good decision. Just said, I'll call Margaret this morning. One condition, Ryan said. Name it. She tells the whole story, Ryan said. Not just Tuesday night. She tells about the shop, about Harold, about the neighbors I've been fixing cars for at cost for the last 11 years. Don't want it to sound like one night of heroism. I want it to sound like what it is, just a person trying to do right by people. There was a pause. That's going to make you sound more impressive. Not less, Jackson said. I know, Ryan said, but it'll be true. And if it's true, maybe someone reads it and it sounds familiar. Maybe it sounds like something they already do. Maybe that's more useful than a hero story. Silence on the line. You've been thinking about this all night, Jackson said. Most of it, Ryan said. All right, Jackson said. Your terms. Margaret Coles came to the shop on Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the night on Route 9, which neither of them commented on, but both of them noticed. She was in her late 50s, with reading glasses she kept taking on and off, and a recorder she placed on the workbench between them with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for 30 years. She had a directness that Ryan respected immediately. No small talk, no warm-up, no attempt to make him feel comfortable before getting to the hard questions. She just sat down on the stool he offered her and looked at him and said, "Tell me about the night." Ryan told her. He told her everything, in the order it happened, without embellishment and without minimizing. Told her about the tire marks and the choice he sat with for 30 seconds in his truck before he got out. Told her about the embankment and the motorcycle and the pulse. Told her about the phone call that dropped and the stabilization rig he built from a rain tarp and a belt. He told her about the 11 miles and the ambulance and the hospital. Told her what he'd said to Emily in the dark. Margaret listened without interrupting. She asked one question during the whole account. When he got to the part about the hospital, when he described walking out without giving his name, she looked up from her notes and said, "Why?" Ryan thought about it honestly. "Because there was nothing left for me to do there," he said. She was with people who could help her. The part I could do was done. Staying would have been about me. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. "Most people would have stayed," she said. "Most people would have kept driving," Ryan said. She wrote something down. Then she asked about the shop, about Harold, about the neighbors he'd been fixing cars for below, cost for years without telling anyone. She'd done her homework, she'd talked to people, had found 3 customers who had tried to pay him more than he charged, and described how he'd refused with a specificity that told her those conversations had stayed with them. Ryan didn't deny any of it. "Why do you do it?" Margaret said. Ryan shrugged. "Because they need it done and I can do it." "That's not an answer," she said pleasantly. "That's an avoidance of an answer." Ryan looked at her. "My father ran this shop before me," he said. "He had a rule. You do the job right, and you charge people fair, and you don't look for recognition because the work is supposed to be its own point. If you start looking for something back, you've changed what the work is. You've held on to that rule," Margaret said. "It's a good rule," Ryan said. She looked at him for a long moment. The recorder sat between them on the workbench. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I've been doing this job for 31 years. Interviewed mayors and criminals, people who did remarkable things and people who did terrible things, and a great many people in between. The thing I can tell you with complete certainty is that most people, when they do something genuinely good, want you to know why. They have a reason, a framework, a story they tell themselves." She paused. "You don't seem to have one." "I have one," Ryan said. "What is it?" "She was there," he said. "She needed help. I was able to help. That's the whole framework. There isn't more to it than that." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Do you understand?" she said carefully, that simplicity is extraordinary, that most people do not operate that way. Most people have something: fear, calculation, self-interest, embarrassment, not wanting to get involved, that gets between seeing a person who needs help and actually helping them." Ryan looked at the workbench. "I know that," he said, "just never understood it." Margaret wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up and said, "Tell me about Jackson Whitmore." Ryan paused, not from reluctance, from thought, because this part was more complicated and he wanted to say it right. "I went in expecting something," he said, "based on what I knew about who he was. I thought he'd be—" He stopped, started. "I thought there'd be an angle from his side. I thought this would be transactional in some way I couldn't see yet. And he sat down across from me in a diner and talked about an ordinary Tuesday," Ryan said. "Talked about his wife and the 26 years and the stupid fight they'd had In the 40 minutes, she was alone on the side of the road. There was nothing transactional about any of it. He was just a man who almost lost his person and wanted to look at the person who had given them another chance. Margaret was watching him closely. You felt for him, she said. I understood him, Ryan said, which surprised me. Why did it surprise you? Ryan was quiet for a moment. Because I had spent years living a certain way, and I was fairly comfortable believing that most people weren't like that. Weren't willing to be honest about the things that scared them. Weren't willing to say this person is everything. I would give everything. He paused. And here was a man that the world would describe very differently than that. He was saying exactly that, without flinching. Did it change how you see him? Margaret said. Changed how I see a few things, Ryan said. She wrote that down. They talked for 2 more hours. She asked about his life, about the years before the shop, about his family, about what Sunday evenings were like. Ryan answered honestly, including the parts that weren't comfortable to say out loud. He told her about the quiet, about how long it had been, about how the word alone had ceased to feel like a description and had started to feel like just the weather, just the permanent condition of things, unremarkable, not worth examining. He told her about the kitchen table and the 2 chairs. She stopped writing when he said that. She just looked at him. You pulled out the 2nd chair, she said. Yeah. For everyone left. Yeah? Ryan looked at his hands. I don't know, he said. I just did. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, Mr. Walker, think you do know. Ryan didn't answer that, but he didn't disagree either. The interview ended at noon. Margaret shook his hand at the door, told him the piece would run Thursday, gave him her card in case he wanted to add anything or correct anything. She was professional and efficient and completely clear about the process. Then she paused at the door. One more thing, she said. Off the record. Okay, Ryan said. She looked at him. My husband had a heart attack 3 years ago, she said. On the highway 2 miles from our house. He pulled over in time. He sat in his car and he waited and he called me. She stopped. 4 cars went by before someone stopped to check on him. 4. He watched them go. Her voice was completely steady, completely professional, but her eyes were different. The man who finally stopped was a 19-year-old kid who'd had his license for 8 months. Didn't know anything about heart attacks. He just pulled over and got out and knocked on the window and said, Sir, are you okay? She paused. My husband is fine. He's been fine for 3 years. But I think about those 4 cars every single day. Ryan looked at her. I'm glad he's okay, he said. So am I, she said. So am I. She put her card in her pocket. Thank you for talking to me, Mr. Walker. She left. Ryan stood in his garage for a moment, then he picked up a wrench and went back to work. The article ran Thursday morning. Ryan knew it was out because his phone started ringing at 7:15 and didn't stop. The first call was his sister Karen, who lived in Phoenix and who said, Ryan Thomas Walker, you carried a woman up an embankment in the dark and you told me your week was quiet, with a tone in her voice that was equal parts pride and fury. It's quiet, Ryan said. Mostly. I am driving down there Saturday, Karen said. You are going to sit across a table from me and tell me everything. You are going to eat something because I guarantee you have not been eating properly. Do you understand me? I understand you, Ryan said. She hung up. Ryan almost smiled. The second call was from a man named Doug, who said he'd read the article and that his daughter had been in a car accident 2 years ago, and the person who stopped had saved her life and he'd never found out who it was. And if Ryan knew anything about how to find someone like that, about how to say thank you to a stranger who just stopped, Ryan told him gently that he didn't have an answer for that, but that the person who stopped probably didn't need finding, probably just needed to know that she was okay. Paused. Is she okay? She is, Doug said, and his voice did something complicated. Then maybe put that out in the world somehow, Ryan said. Say it publicly. Say she's okay. People like that don't need thanks. But knowing it mattered, knowing the person made it that stays with you. Doug was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. Thank you. The third call was a number Ryan didn't recognize, and he answered it because he'd been answering every call since 7:15 and he saw no reason to change policy. Mr. Walker said, a man's voice, deep, older, with the particular careful formality of a man who had made a lot of important phone calls in his life and treated each one with the same gravity. My name is Robert Ashworth. I'm the director of the Arizona Emergency Services Foundation. Been reading about you this morning, and I'd like to talk to you about our volunteer programs if you have a moment. Ryan was under the hood of a minivan, and he came up and wiped his hands. Sure, he said. What do you want to know? Robert Ashworth talked for 10 minutes about the foundation, about what they did, about a gap they'd been trying to fill for 3 years, a program to train everyday citizens in roadside emergency response, the specific skills needed when someone goes down in a remote location and professional help is 20 or 30 minutes away. The skills Ryan had used on Route 9, the skills he'd learned as a volunteer firefighter and kept current in his own quiet way over 17 years. We've been looking for the right person to lead the training component, Ashworth said. Someone with both the technical background and the ability to communicate it to people who aren't first responders. Someone who can make ordinary people believe they're capable of doing something that feels extraordinary. A pause. Your article reads like someone who could do that. Ryan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the silver-haired man. Nobody stopped. He thought about Margaret Coles' husband and 4 cars that kept going. Thought about a 19-year-old kid with 8 months on his license who knocked on a window and said, "Sir, are you okay?" "Tell me more about the program," Ryan said. They talked for another half hour. Ryan hung up. Jackson was already calling. "I saw," Jackson said. "Robert Ashworth," Ryan said. "I know Robert," Jackson said. "It's good people. Serious man. If he's asking, it's real." "Did you call him?" Ryan said. A pause. "I may have mentioned your name to a few people," Jackson said. "Jackson, you said you wanted the story to be useful," Jackson said, without any apology in his voice. "I'm making it useful. There's a difference between doing something for recognition and doing something with impact. You didn't stop on that road to be recognized, but what happened because you stopped that can reach a lot more roads than Route 9. Ryan sat with that. "That's a fine line," he said. "It is," Jackson agreed. "But you know which side of it we're on." Ryan thought about it. He thought, but not honestly. The way he thought about everything, not quickly, not comfortably, but straight through to the middle of it. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "Robert's program could train 500 people a year," Jackson said. "People who drive those roads, people who might be the next person who comes over a hill and sees tire marks." He paused. "How many Tuesdays is that? How many people who almost didn't make it who do?" Ryan closed his eyes for a second. "You're not wrong," he said. "I know," Jackson said. "I'm occasionally not wrong." Ryan almost laughed. It died in his throat when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He looked at it. It said, "I was on Route 9 that night, 40 minutes before you. I saw the marks. I kept driving. Been sick about it since. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I think I just need someone to know." Ryan stared at that text for a long time. He read it 3 times. He typed back, "You know now, that's what matters. Knowing matters. Don't drive past the next one." He waited. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, "I won't." Ryan put the phone face down on the workbench. He'd stood there for a moment with his hand on the phone, and he thought about 40 minutes. Thought about the math of 40 minutes, what it meant, how close it was, how the whole story turned on that number. Thought about that anonymous driver on Route 9 who was walking around with that weight and what it cost to carry it and what it cost to finally say it to someone. Picked the phone back up. He found the text. He typed one more line. "It's okay, you told the truth. That's not nothing." He sent it. He stood there. He thought about forgiveness, not his to give, not directed at him, but the general concept of it, the mechanics of it, the way it moves between people. Thought about how a man could spend years in silence carrying a 40-minute window and how a single sentence sent to a stranger in the morning could change the texture of the thing he carried. Thought about how small the gestures were, how consistently small. Voice in the dark, a hand on an embankment, a text message from a phone on a workbench. "Sir, are you okay?" So small, so completely and utterly everything. Jackson called again at 4 that afternoon. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. The tone of it was different, lower, more private than the way he'd spoken earlier in the day. Ryan heard it immediately and set down what he was doing. "Okay," Ryan said. But Jackson stopped. Started again. "She's been pushing herself, recovery-wise. Coming back too fast. The doctors have told her twice this week to slow down, and she's, you know what she is. She's not good at slowing down, Ryan said. She's catastrophically bad at it, Jackson said. She was at the shop this morning before I was awake. She drove herself. He paused, and in the pause was the particular exhaustion of a man who loves a woman who is more than he can fully contain and has learned to live with that. That's not what I need to tell you. Ryan waited. She found out about the text, Jackson said. The driver who passed her. The anonymous one. Ryan went still. How? He said. Margaret Coles had already heard about it from a source at the foundation. Apparently, Ashworth mentioned it when he was talking about the program. She called Emily for a comment. Em called me. Another pause. Ryan. She knows someone drove past her while she was lying there. Ryan closed his eyes. How is she? Said. Jackson stopped again. The pause was long. She's Emily. She's processing it the way she processes everything, which means she's going to be outwardly fine and it's going to cost her something internal that she won't tell me about until 6 from now when it comes out sideways. Ryan opened his eyes. Does she want to know who it was? He said. She says no, Jackson said. She means it. I believe her. She says, and this is a direct quote, there's no version of knowing that helps me. Ryan thought about that. She's right, he said. I know she's right, Jackson said. Knowing she's right doesn't make it easier to watch her sit with it. There was a weight in Jackson's voice that was different from anything Ryan had heard from him before. Not the grief of almost losing her that had been enormous, volcanic, the kind of feeling that reshapes everything around it. This was smaller and more persistent, the ordinary ache of not being able to fix the thing your person is carrying, particular helplessness of loving someone and reaching the edge of what love can do. Ryan knew that feeling. He knew it from a different angle, from the solo side of it, from the side where you carry things alone because there is no one to carry them with you. But he recognized the shape of it. Can't fix this one, Ryan said quietly. Jackson was quiet for a moment. No, he said. You can sit with her while she processes it, Ryan said. That's what you can do. You can be there, physically there, in the room. That's not nothing. That's actually most of it. A long silence. You know, Jackson said slowly, for a man who lives alone and doesn't appear to have had a relationship in the better part of a decade, you have a remarkably clear sense of what people need from each other. Ryan almost laughed. I've had a lot of time to think about it, he said. Jackson made a sound half laugh, half something more rueful. Ryan, he said, and it was the first time he'd used the first name. Just like that, without the formality in front of it, the way people do when something shifts between them and the formality becomes suddenly not just unnecessary but actively wrong. I want to say something to you, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you deflect it. Okay, Ryan said. I have spent my life surrounded by people, Jackson said. Hundreds of people. People who know my name, people who would do things for me, people who show up when I call. And I have been for most of that life genuinely, profoundly alone in the ways that matter. Because the people around me are there for reasons. They're there because of what I represent, what I can do, what I have. That's not company, that's just noise. He paused. You are the first person I have met in longer than I can remember who showed up in my life for no reason. Not for me, not for what I could give or what I represented. Just because a person needed help. And then you were here, and you were real. And I don't quite know what to do with that either. Ryan sat with that. He thought about what Jackson had said about noise. He thought about the Pine Outside had. He thought about particular loneliness by people who were there for the wrong reasons, and whether that was better or worse than being surrounded by no one, and decided it was probably just different kinds of the same desert. I think, Ryan said carefully, that we're both pretty bad at this. What? Jackson said at people, Ryan said, at letting them in. Trusting that they're there for the right reasons. Beat of silence. Yeah, Jackson said, that's probably fair. Probably going to take some work, Ryan said. Probably, Jackson agreed. I'm willing to do the work, Ryan said. If you are. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that means someone is deciding something real. Yeah, Jackson said, I am. They hung up. Ryan stood in his garage with the late afternoon light coming through the windows and the sound of the street outside, and the smell of oil and metal that had been the backdrop of his whole adult life. Thought about that conversation, both of what had been said and what hadn't, and what the space between those two things meant. Thought about trust, about how it wasn't a decision exactly, Not the way you decided to change a tire or take a different road. Sleep was more like the hydraulic lift. It had to be maintained, had to be checked, had to be serviced regularly, or it would fail you at the worst moment. It was ongoing. It required showing up again and again, even when showing up was inconvenient or uncomfortable, or cost you something you hadn't planned to spend. He thought he was probably overdue for some maintenance of his own. Karen arrived Saturday morning, the way she'd promised, driving 4 hours from Phoenix with a casserole dish wrapped in a towel in the passenger seat, and that specific look on her face that older sisters develop somewhere around the age of 15 and never entirely lose. She came through the shop door, set the casserole down on the workbench, looked at her brother for a long moment, and then crossed the floor and put her arms around him without saying a word. Ryan stood there. He put his arms around her. He didn't say anything either. They stayed like that for a moment, longer than either of them had planned. When Karen pulled back, she looked at his face. "You're okay," she said. "Wasn't a question, I'm okay," he said. "But something changed," she said. Ryan thought about how to answer that. "The second chair," he said. She frowned. "What?" "I pulled out the second chair," he said. "The kitchen table. After everyone left on Sunday. Don't know why, I just did and I left it out." Karen looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes did something complicated. "Good," she said finally. Voice was very quiet. "Good, Ryan." She picked up the casserole. "Come eat something," she said. "You look like you've been living on coffee and stubbornness for a week." "Basically accurate," Ryan said. She shook her head. She was almost smiling. She went to the kitchen. Ryan followed her. He sat down at the table, his table, with the two chairs pulled out from it the way he'd left them, and he listened to his sister moving around his kitchen, the sounds of someone who belonged in a space. Something about those ordinary domestic sounds in his ordinary kitchen loosened something in his chest that had been held tight for a long time. Didn't know exactly what it was. He just knew it was loosening. And that felt like the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. Karen put a plate in front of him. She sat down across from him in the second chair. She looked at him. "Tell me everything," she said. Ryan looked at his sister. Thought about all of it, Route 9, and the embankment, and Emily's voice saying things like that shouldn't stay covered, and Jackson looking up at the sky in a parking lot, and a text from an anonymous driver who had been sick about 40 minutes, Robert Ashworth, and a training program that could put the right skills in the hands of the next person on the next road, and a silver-haired man with working life hands who had said, "Nobody stop." Father's tools uncovered on the workbench, and the particular quality of his house's silence on Sunday evening after everyone left, the way it held the shape of all those people, even after they were gone. Thought about all of it, then he said, "Okay," and he started talking. Karen stayed until Monday. 2 days. She slept in the spare room that Ryan had been using as storage for 3 years and hadn't thought twice about until she stood in the doorway and looked at the boxes stacked against the wall with an expression that said everything without saying a word. Cleared it in 40 minutes. She made the bed with sheets she found in the hall closet. Sheets Ryan hadn't known were there. Sheets his mother had bought years ago, and that still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets his mother had kept in every linen closet in every house she'd ever lived in. Ryan stood in the doorway of the spare room that night, after Karen had gone to bed, and breathed in that smell, and didn't move for almost a full minute. Sunday morning, they sat at the kitchen table, both chairs pulled out, both chairs occupied, and Karen drank her coffee and listened, while Ryan told her the rest of what he hadn't gotten to Saturday. About the foundation, about Ashworth's program, about what Jackson had said on the phone Friday, that he was willing to do the work, about the anonymous text from the driver on Route 9. Karen listened to all of it without interrupting, the way she had listened to things her whole life completely, with the particular quality of attention that made the person talking feel like they were the only person in the world. It was the thing Ryan had always valued most about her and had called on least, because calling on it required being the person talking, and being the person talking required trusting someone enough to give them the real story. And he had spent 9 years giving very few people the real story about anything. When he finished, she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at him across the table. "Can I say something?" she said. "Yeah," Ryan said. "You have been alone for too long," she said. Not with anger, not with accusation. just with the flat certainty of someone who had known him for 51 years and was done being tactful about something that mattered. And I let you be. I called every Sunday and I asked how you were, and you said fine, and I accepted fine because it was easier than pushing, and I am telling you right now that I am done accepting fine. Ryan looked at her. I am okay, Karen, he said. You are better than okay, she said. That's different. Okay is the floor, Ryan. It is the absolute minimum. You have been living at the floor for 9 years and calling it enough, and it is not enough. And I think some part of you knows that now. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment. The second chair, he said finally. The second chair, she agreed. They sat with that. Then Karen said, I want you to come to Phoenix for Thanksgiving. Ryan opened his mouth. Don't, she said. Don't say you'll see. Don't say maybe. Don't tell me about the shop. I want a yes, or I want a real reason. And I want you to think about which one of those you actually have. Ryan looked at his sister. He thought about Thanksgiving, thought about the last 4, 5, 6 Thanksgivings, which had all blurred into the same general shape: shop closed, house quiet, something easy from a can or a box, television on in the background, not because he was watching it, but because silence can have a texture that becomes its own kind of noise after long enough. Thought about Karen's kitchen in Phoenix, which was always too hot because she ran the oven for 3 days straight, leading up to the holiday, and never opened enough windows. Her husband Dave's habit of falling asleep in the recliner at exactly 2:15 every Thanksgiving afternoon with the football game still on. And the way Karen's kids, his nephews, grown now, with kids of their own, filled a house with a noise that was completely different from the noise of 167 motorcycles, but was somehow the same category of thing. Yes, Ryan said. Karen looked at him. Yes, she said. Yes, he said. I'll be there. She blinked, like she'd been braced for resistance, and the absence of it caught her off guard. Then she smiled. Not the almost smile from Saturday. The real one. The one that was her actual face when something good happened. Good, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were doing that complicated thing again. Good, Ryan. She left Monday morning. She hugged him in the driveway for a long time and told him to call her during the week, not just Sunday. And he said he would, and she said she meant it, and he said he meant it too. He watched her car until it turned off his road and disappeared. Stood in the driveway. The roof above him was solid. The fence along the back of the property was standing straight. The garage behind him had a working lift and a set of uncovered tools on the back bench. The kitchen behind him had 2 chairs pulled out from the table. He went to work. The foundation called Wednesday. Not Ashworth this time, a woman named Sandra who handled program development and who was direct and thorough and clearly very good at her job. She outlined the training program in detail. 12-week curriculum, 8 sessions, covering roadside assessment, improvised stabilization, emergency communication of signal areas, the psychology of stopping, because that said was its own separate curriculum, and possibly the most important one. The psychology of stopping, Ryan said. Most people who drive past someone who needs help, Sandra said, don't do it because they're bad people. They do it because of something that happens in the moment, a calculation that happens too fast to examine, a fear, an assumption that someone else will stop, a sense of not being qualified, of not knowing what to do. She paused. If we can interrupt that calculation, if we can give people a mental framework and a skill set and have them practice the decision, before they're in the moment, the data suggests the stopping rate changes significantly. Ryan was very quiet. He was thinking about a 30-second window in a truck on Route 9, about every voice that had spoken in that 30 seconds, about which ones he'd listened to and which ones he hadn't and why. Do it, he said. Sandra stopped mid-sentence. Mr. Walker, she said. The program, he said. I'll do it. What do I need to do to start? A pause. Then Sandra said, with the carefully controlled tone of someone trying not to sound as pleased as she was, we'd need you to come in for an orientation. Meet the team. Review the curriculum. When, Ryan said. We could do Friday, she said. Friday works, Ryan said. He called Jackson afterward. Jackson answered on the first ring. Sandra called me, Jackson said. She's fast, Ryan said. She's exceptional, Jackson said. Ryan, this is good. This is genuinely good, I know, Ryan said. And then, because Jackson had earned the honesty, I'm nervous about it. Beat of silence. Like the admission was something Jackson needed a second to handle, not because it surprised him, but because it meant something. Be good at it, Jackson said. I don't know that, Ryan said. I do, Jackson said. Because the part that matters most, the psychology piece, you've already lived it. You know what happens in those 30 seconds better than anyone they could put in front of a room. You know it from the inside. Ryan thought about that. That's what Ashworth said too, Ryan said. Ashworth and I are occasionally both right at the same time, Jackson said. It happens. Ryan almost smiled. How's Emily, he said. Pause. Different from the other pauses, heavier, more private. She's been quiet this week, Jackson said, working through the 40-minute thing. She says she's okay, and I believe her, and I'm also watching her like a hawk, and she knows it, and she's letting me, which is how I know she's not entirely okay yet. You're in the room, Ryan said. I'm in the room, Jackson said. Every room she's in, I'm in. That's right, Ryan said. It's exactly right. Jackson was quiet for a moment. She wants to see you, he said. Not today. When she's ready. She has something she wants to say, and she wants to say it in person. Whenever she's ready, Ryan said. I'm not going anywhere. He heard something in Jackson's exhale, not quite relief, but adjacent. Okay, Jackson said. Good. They hung up. The call came 3 weeks later. Not from Jackson. From Emily directly, which was itself a statement. Emily Whitmore did not send intermediaries for things she intended to do herself. She called Ryan on a Thursday evening and said she'd like to come by the shop Saturday morning if that worked for him. He said it worked. She arrived at 9 without the cane this time, moving carefully, but under her own full authority. She looked better. The careful deliberation of the recovery was still there, but beneath it, her natural pace was reasserting itself. The pace of a woman who moved through the world with intention. She walked into the shop and looked at the uncovered workbench in the back, the tools laid out in the order his father had always kept them. And she nodded once, the way you nod at something that's been put right. You left them out, she said. I left them out, Ryan said. She turned to face him. I want to tell you something, she said. I need you to actually listen, not just hear it, and then minimize it. I'll try, Ryan said. She looked at him steadily. In dealing with knowing that someone drove past me, she said, 40 minutes. I've been sitting with that number for 3 weeks, and I want you to know how I've landed on it, because I think it matters, and I think you're the right person to hear it. Ryan waited. For the first week, she said, I was angry. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I was angry in a way that felt very large and very clean, the kind of anger that's almost satisfying because it has a clear target. Someone drove past me, someone made a choice, and that choice was wrong, and I was the consequences of it. She paused. And then I thought about what you said to that driver, she said. In the text. You don't know this, but Jackson showed me. It's okay, you told the truth. That's not nothing. She stopped. Something in her face was very controlled and very real at the same time. And I sat with that for a long time, because my instinct was it's not okay. It's not okay to drive past a person who needs help. That's true, it's not okay. Ryan held completely still. But here's where I landed, Emily said. That person is going to live with 40 minutes for the rest of their life. I know that. I know it because of how that text sounded, the weight of it. The fact that they reached out to a stranger because they couldn't carry it alone anymore. They know. They will always know. She paused, and the anger I was carrying was costing me something I couldn't afford to keep spending. So I put it down. She looked at Ryan directly. I put it down because of what you did, she said, not just on the road, after the text you sent. The word you're doing with the foundation. The way you've handled all of this without making it about yourself for a single second. You modeled something for me, how to take a terrible thing and point it toward what's useful. She paused, trying to do the same thing. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. How's it going, he said. Emily Whitmore, 3 weeks out from the discovery that someone drove past her dying body on a desert road, almost smiled. It's a process, she said. Yeah, Ryan said. Most things are. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small and held it out to him. He looked at it, a coin old, worn, the kind that had been handled many times over many years. Picked it up. On one side was an eagle. On the other, a date, 1971. That was my father's, she said. He carried it his whole life. He said it was his reminder that most things that feel permanent aren't, and most things that feel temporary are the ones that actually last. She paused. I want you to have it. Ryan looked at the coin in his palm. Emily, he said. Don't, she said. Don't tell me you can't take it. I am giving it to someone who will understand what it means. My father would have understood you completely. He was a mechanic, too. Ryan looked up at her. She nodded. Small shop in New Mexico, she said. 30 years. Charged people fair and never looked for recognition. She paused. You would have gotten along. Ryan closed his hand around the coin. Thank you, he said. Just that? No deflection, no minimizing. Emily looked at him. Good, she said. You're learning. She stayed for an hour. They talked about her father's shop and Ryan's father's shop and the particular specific culture of small independent garages that had existed for decades and was slowly, quietly disappearing. Talked about Harold and his Ford, which Ryan had finished completely 2 weeks ago, and which Harold had picked up with the careful reverence of a man reunited with something he loved. Talked about Karen and Thanksgiving, which made Emily say she was glad and mean it. At one point, Emily said, Jackson talks about you, more than he talks about most people. He'll mention something you said or something you did, like it's just a fact about the world now. Like you're just part of the landscape. Ryan looked at her. That's new for him, Emily said quietly. Letting someone in that way, referencing them like they're just there, like they belong. She paused. Don't make a big thing of it. Just know that it's real and it matters, and you did that just by being yourself. Ryan didn't make a big thing of it, but he heard every word. The first training session ran on a Thursday evening 6 weeks after Ryan's conversation with Sandra. 8 people in a room at the Foundation's building, a mix of ages, backgrounds, occupations. A retired teacher, a young woman who worked nights at a gas station on a highway, a man in his 60s who drove a delivery route through rural areas, college student, a couple who had driven past an accident 2 years ago and hadn't stopped and had come to the program because they were still trying to fix something they couldn't fix any other way. Ryan stood in front of them and looked at them and thought, these are exactly the right people. Started with the 30 seconds. 30 seconds, he said, is how long most people sit with the decision. You see something, you process it, you make a call. By the time 30 seconds is done, you've either stopped or you're already past it. He looked around the room. Tonight we're going to talk about what happens in those 30 seconds. What voices you hear. Which ones are telling you the truth and which ones aren't. The retired teacher raised her hand. What voices were you hearing, she said. That night, in your truck. The room was very quiet. Ryan thought about it. The voice that said I was tired, he said. The voice that said it probably wasn't as bad as it looked. The voice that said someone else would stop. He paused. The voice that said, what could you even do? How did you answer that one? The gas station worker said. Ryan looked at her. I got out of the truck, he said. That was the answer. You don't know what you can do until you get out of the truck. He watched that land in the room. He watched it move across people's faces, not a big, dramatic shift, but the small internal shift of something being filed in a new place, organized differently, made available for future use. That was it. That was the thing. Not a heroic story. Not an extraordinary man doing an extraordinary thing. Just a 30-second window. And what you do in it. And the fact that you can practice that, you can rehearse it. You can make the decision in advance, in a room on a Thursday evening, so that when the moment comes on a dark road at 1 in the morning, you've already lived through it once. Taught for 2 hours. He drove home on Route 9, drove past the kilometer 22 marker, and he did not slow down, and he did not look at the embankment. He had looked at it. He had looked at it as much as it needed to be looked at. Given him everything it had to give him, and he was carrying all of it already, the coin in his pocket, the second chair at the table, the training program that would put the right knowledge in the right hands, the phone that rang now with voices that weren't just customers and weren't just his sister on Sundays. Drove home. He unlocked his front door. He went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat down at the table. Both chairs were still out. He wrapped his hands around his mug and he sat in his house, which was quiet the way it had always been quiet, except that the quiet had changed. Depth now. It had texture. It was the quiet of a space that had been full of people and held the memory of them, that was full again on Thursdays and would be full at Thanksgiving, and had a phone that rang with Karen's voice on more than just Sundays. It was not the quiet of absence. It was the quiet of rest. Ryan reached into his pocket and set the coin on the table. He looked at it, the eagle, the worn edges, 1971. The weight of a man's whole life, carried in something small enough to fit in a palm. He thought about Emily's father in his shop in New Mexico. 30 years. Fair prices, no recognition sought. He thought about his own father and the tools and the rule. Thought about Jackson looking up at the sky in a parking lot, just needing a moment that was his own. He thought about the anonymous driver sending a text in the dark, trying to put down something they'd been carrying alone. Thought about 8 people in a room on a Thursday evening, learning what to do in 30 seconds. Thought about a woman's voice saying, "I heard you." Every word. He sat with all of it. He picked up the coin and turned it over once in his hand. Then he set it down in the center of the table between the 2 chairs where both people sitting there could see it. Thought about the night on Route 9 and the man he had been driving home tired, alone, running on autopilot, a man so accustomed to helping others that he had stopped noticing he was disappearing himself, and he thought about who that man was now, 3 months later, sitting in the same kitchen but in a completely different life. The same house, the same table, the same coffee, different chairs. He thought about what Emily had said, that he had modeled something, how to take a terrible thing and point it toward what's useful. Thought about what Jackson had said, men who just do the right thing without needing anything back. You don't find them very often. When you do, you don't let them disappear back into the quiet. Thought about his father's rule. Don't stop until it's done right. He understood now, in a way he hadn't before, that the job was never just the thing in front of him. The oil change, the transmission, the roof, those were the visible parts. The job, the actual job, the real job, the one his father had been trying to teach him all along, was the person. It was always the person. The work was just the reason you got close enough to matter. He had spent 11 years doing the work and forgetting the person, including, most importantly, himself. He sat in his kitchen at 10:30 on a Thursday night with a coin on the table and 2 chairs pulled out and a phone full of voices and a program that would run again next Thursday and the Thursday after that. He felt something he had not felt in so long that it took him a moment to find the name for it. Not happiness exactly, though it was close. Not peace, though it was that too. It was something older and more fundamental than either of those words. It was the feeling of a life that had come back to itself. A man who had drifted quietly and slowly away from the center of his own story and had been, by one choice on a dark road, pulled back in. Not by accident, not by luck, by the simple, radical act of stopping when stopping was what was required. He had stopped for Emily, and in stopping for Emily, without planning it, without knowing it, without asking for it or expecting it or believing he deserved it, he had also stopped for himself. That was the truth of it. The whole truth, the one that had taken 3 months and 167 motorcycles and a coin from a dead mechanic in New Mexico and his sister's voice and a room full of 8 people on a Thursday evening to reach. The full shape of what one decision on a dark highway had actually been. Ryan Walker had spent years believing he was the person who showed up for other people. He had been right. What he hadn't known, what he was only now understanding fully in the kitchen at the table with the coin between the chairs, was that showing up for other people, truly showing up all the way without leaving yourself behind in the truck, that was also how you showed up for yourself. The work and the person, they had always been the same thing. He just hadn't known until a woman held on in the dark because of the sound of his voice, and the world that came to find him turned out to be the one he'd needed all along. Picked up his coffee. He drank it. It was not the coffee of a man sitting alone. It was the coffee of a man who knew exactly where he was and who was coming and what the second chair was for. That, Ryan Walker understood, sitting in the quiet of a life that had finally remembered how to be full, was not a small thing. That was everything.